I'm here with Perry Bratt. He's been working in the landscape industry for 46 years, and we're here to ask him some vital questions about how we can save water this year and in the next few years, and also have beautiful homes. All right, Perry, I'm pretty sure everybody wants to know, is it still okay to have sod?
Oh, definitely. Not only is it okay, but we need to have sod. One of my biggest concerns is how we bring in these big box stores and we put literally acres of asphalt around them and destroy the farmland or wherever that box store was built, and then put rocks and fabric and a few little trees and a few little shrubs. We're hurting the environment. Trees and shrubs and lawn give off oxygen, and we need that oxygen in the environment. So most definitely we need to have lawns continue. Over the weekend I was at a farm, an alfalfa farm, and just 4 miles from town, same elevation and all, and in town it was 104 degrees. On the farm it was about 98 degrees. Still hot, but the only explanation is that they had green alfalfa around the farmhouse.
Right, cooling things down. So Perry, can you give us some details on how to water during spring, summer, and fall, and how do they differ?
This is one of my biggest concerns, is people tend to set their controller at, let's say, 45 minutes per zone, and they keep it there all year long until they turn it off in the fall, wasting a tremendous amount of water. And so we just need to adjust our controllers accordingly.
I met a man, a client, a couple of weeks ago who waters his lawn for 15 minutes every single day at 8 a.m. year-round.
We see that all the time. I was at a home 2 weeks ago where an older lady, sweet lady, meaning well, but wanted to have a green lawn. Her husband had died, and so she just set her controllers for 1 hour, every single valve, 15 different valves, large estate. And not only was it wasting water, but you water too much, you have more disease, more weeds, more problems with your lawn. You have to fertilize more because it washes that fertilizer right out of the soil.
Right. And timing too, schedule during the day. Talk to us a little bit about scheduling your sprinklers coming on at midnight versus 8 a.m.
Okay. Typically, we have less wind between midnight and about 6 or 7 in the morning. And consequently, less misting and wind blowing that water and wasting that water because of evaporation, etc. So the best time to set that is from about midnight till about 5 or 6 in the morning, and you'll save a lot of water.
I think there's less evaporation at night as well. So if you're watering during the heat of the day, a lot of that's going to just be evaporated and blown by the wind and also by the heat. And
so not only the wind, but also the heat that we get during the day will cause a lot more water usage.
A lot of people have different types of sprinklers. How do they differ, and how can we save water using the different kinds?
Most yards will have 3 kinds of watering systems. One will be a spray head, which typically doesn't water more than about 15 foot in distance, and then rotor heads, which can go 12 feet to 40 or 50 feet, and then drip systems. We'll talk about drip a little later. But with spray heads, we need to remember they put out about 1/4 of the amount of water that a rotor head. So these individuals that set their controllers for 15 minutes for every single zone are missing the point that those spray zones are putting out 4 times as much water on the average than a rotor head. So typically you need to water the rotors a little longer, the spray quite a bit less.
That's good to know. Thank you. And then what about drip systems? How do you water with a drip system?
Well, we typically you want to put drips on your shrubs and perennials. It's a little difficult to put on annuals. You generally have to have a spray system, but you could hook it to the drip system and use misters for those flowers where you want to put annuals. So generally, your perennial flowers, your shrubs, your trees will take about 1/4 amount of water as your lawns will take. That's generally why we want to see more shrubs and perennials, grasses that are ornamental grasses, and not so much grass that's lawn grass. But as I said before, please continue to have the green grass there and not asphalt or concrete or just rock, because we need to cool the environment and we need to get oxygen into our air.
So tell us a little bit about the different kinds of sprinklers. I know that there are rotors and spray heads. How do they differ, and how does that make a difference as we water?
Good. Extremely important. Most people, it seems to me, over the 45 years I've been doing this, will set their spray heads for the same amount of time as the rotor heads. Spray heads put out about 4 times as much water per square foot as a rotor head on the average. And so typically you need to set that time a fourth in length compared to a rotor head.
Okay, so if I'm going to use spray heads, I would spray for 10 minutes versus
40 minutes.
40 minutes with a
Generally,
rotor.
it should be closer to about 5 to
Right.
7 minutes
Right.
versus 20 minutes or more for the rotor heads.
So how should we set our controller to water different amounts of time for spring, summer, fall?
Okay, good. So for 35 years now, we've had what's called a seasonal adjust on controllers. I haven't seen any controllers made in the last 35 years that doesn't have a seasonal adjust. That means with one easy click of the dial, you can turn the percentage of water up or the percentage of water down for all the zones. Let's say you have 10 zones. You don't have to go and program each one of those zones every time it looks like we're going to have a rainstorm or whatever. You simply go to that seasonal adjust, and if you want to cut it down 50%, you cut it to 50%. If you want it to be more because there's a heat wave coming, you set it for 125%. It takes you seconds, literally, to do that. But people aren't doing it.
I wonder if they just don't know that it exists. Like, it's such a simple thing, you know. Good to know. Good to know. I think that alone would save a lot of water.
Right.
So, you mentioned earlier that shrubs and trees take less water than lawn. We do want to have lawn, but can you talk more about shrubs and trees and perennials and how they do use less water? And we also have, in Utah anyway, a lot of varieties of water-wise plants that we can use, so that we're not. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word xeriscape, they think it's just rocks and cactus, and that's really not what it is. Can you talk a little bit more about xeriscaping and how that can be brought into a water-wise plan?
People tend to think that lawns take a lot more. Let me back up. People tend to think the shrub beds and flower beds take a lot more work. It takes a lot more work if you don't weed on a regular basis. If you spent the same amount of time on the flower bed per square foot as you would on the lawn, you wouldn't have the weed problem if you use pre-emergence, etc. And so, to get more specifically to your question, if they not only would make sure that they put pre-emergence down and take care of the weeds, they'll find that it's a lot less work and less water to have shrub beds. Plus, aesthetically, I think it can really add to a home or a fence or a foundation around the house. So there are shrubs that will take a lot less water than other shrubs, or grasses will take, ornamental grasses will take a lot less water than other grasses like your lawn grasses. But for the most part, it's such a small difference. You put a boxwood in that takes a little more water than sagebrush, it may be a fourth less water. Granted, the sagebrush will live longer with less water than the boxwood, but the sagebrush, if you want it to look nice, and they can look very nice in a yard, that bluish color,
Yes.
then you need to have almost as much water as that boxwood.
Interesting. Good to know. So if I'm starting from scratch, like building a brand new house, what things can I do in my landscape as I'm starting out that will save water in the future?
Okay. Two things that we tell people all the time. If you're going to cut because of budget constrictions, cut anywhere but the sprinkler system and the soil. Okay. 2 weeks ago, we had a client that had a big yellow spot in his yard. He was frustrated because he asked us to adjust the sprinklers, which we did. I went and put a shovel in that yellow spot that was so wet that he had mushrooms growing in the yellow spot. There's plenty of water. In fact, 4 heads were hitting that yellow spot. But for years, he's been frustrated because he's had that yellow spot. When I put the shovel in the ground, it went 2 or 3 inches and then stopped. I asked him to come over and do the same thing with him. Now I said, go over here 5 feet past the yellow spot and see what you get. Very easily, he sunk the shovel in 6, 7 inches. He has rock under there. He needs to take the grass back, get the rock out, put some topsoil in, and he won't have that dry spot.
Before that, I wonder if we can talk a little bit. I remember when I was at BYU, there were a lot of times we'd have like a dry spot in a lawn, and we just needed to adjust the sprinklers. But dry spots will get to a point where if it's turning like a lightish silver green or even brown, it really does just take a while for that grass to come back. So soaking it every day might not be the best thing, because it's not going to come back overnight. If you can catch it quickly when it's just kind of wilted, it'll spring right back. But sometimes it can take a couple of weeks for it to turn green again. So I think it's important for people to know not to overwater that spot, hoping it'll come back quicker. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time.
Right.
So.
And if they overwater, they oftentimes will get a disease, a fungus in there that will spread throughout the whole lawn, and people think it's a sprinkler problem. It's not. It's a fungus. It's turning that grass yellowish.
Yeah.
And then they really start wasting water.
Yes.
And grass.
Okay. So let's say somebody has a yellow spot right in the middle of their lawn. What can they do to, first of all, figure out why it's yellow, and then what could some of the remedies be?
Two things. One, I've already talked about the fact that maybe they don't have the right topsoil in that spot. More often than not, it's because sprinklers aren't adjusted right. Spray heads are typically adjusted so they hit each other and the droplets, as a result of friction, drop down and water that area. If those heads are too far apart, then there are going to be areas where it doesn't hit and drop down, and that's a challenge. You do have nozzles that have an underspray, and a lot of times that will really help, just to get a nozzle that has an underspray and puts a little bit more water in that dry spot. With rotor heads, generally it's because they don't have head-to-head coverage, which is really important, and they don't adjust it so there's an even stream of water underneath that rotor from one head to the other head. If you do that adjustment, generally you won't have any kind of a dry spot.
Perfect. And you can find out how to make those adjustments on YouTube even. They've got simple videos
Right.
that can help you do that.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Sometimes nozzles are clogged. There may be some dirt that's gotten into that nozzle, and it's a matter of taking the nozzle off and cleaning it and putting it back on. Or the screen that's underneath that nozzle, taking the nozzle off, take that screen, clean it off, put it back, and screw the nozzle on.
Right. Well, Perry, what about water features? We've got a beautiful one here. A lot of people think that we shouldn't have water features because a lot of water evaporates or whatever. What can you tell us about water features, especially during a drought?
I like this question because we've found that water features per square foot use less water than lawn per square foot. The reason why is because at water, as long as it's built right and there's not leaks, that water, you lose some with evaporation just like you do with lawn. But you have a lot of rock that doesn't have water on it, and a lot of typically you have shrubs and plants around that feature. And so if you want a water feature, put it in. It will save water or not be any more than lawn. Great.
All right. So in the lawn, you've got either spray heads or rotors. What about shrub beds? We use a lot of drip in shrub beds. How can we save water doing that?
Typically, there's three kinds of drip systems. One is a soaker hose, which in my opinion, they haven't perfected enough to encourage people to use. We've tried soaker hoses, and we just haven't found a system that works well. I hope somebody develops one. The other is called inline, where they have every 12 inches or 18 inches or sometimes every 6 inches an emitter in that drip tube. The challenge with inline is a lot of times they're running that in areas where you don't want any water, and so you can waste water with inline. My favorite is where you have a drip line and we put a emitter, typically a 2 gallon per hour or 5 gallon per hour or maybe a 1 gallon per hour, depending on the requirement of the plant that drip emitter is going to water. Sometimes with trees we'll put 4 2 gallons or 6 2 gallons if it's a big evergreen. If it's a little grass, ornamental grass, we may just put 1 2 gallon emitter to that. If it's a small little perennial, maybe 1 gallon per hour emitter to that plant. And it's amazing how much you can save water if you do that.
Well, you're not watering anything except the plant, which I would think also helps cut down on weeds.
Oh, a lot on the weeds.
That's great. What can you tell homeowners about water rights and how that can affect the way they save water?
Okay, so we all have water rights to a certain degree, but if there's no water, you don't have right to anything. I have a water feature in my home, and this year there's no water coming. It's from the source is from a spring coming out the side of the hill. There's no water coming out the side of the hill this year, and so yes, I have a right to that water. It's part of my property, but can't use it. So the concern I have with people thinking they have this water right is that if everybody claimed the water rights they had, and used 100% of those water rights, nobody would have water, or we'd have very little. So that's my take on water rights. Let me talk about water loss. If you have one sprinkler that's typically a spray head, let's say, that's putting out 1.5 gallons per minute, which is an average half spray head, and you water that system 10 minutes longer than you should, you're losing 1.5 gallons times 10 is 15 gallons from that one head. Let's say you have 10 heads on that zone. That's 15,000 gallons of water that you're losing. Let's say you have 10 zones that you're wasting times 15,000. You're losing 150,000 gallons of water that lawn doesn't need. So it's extremely important you don't overwater.
Right. What about leaks in a system?
So let's say you have a leak, a small leak, and you're only losing 5 gallons of water. If you do the math, let's say it's your toilet, and you're losing 5 gallons of water a day. You do the math, you're losing 43,800 gallons in a year if you don't take care of that toilet leak. Well, irrigation, it's very easy to lose with a small little leak at a head or a line. It's very easy to lose 5 gallons of water in a day, or 10 times that amount.
If the homeowner goes out in the spring, they can turn on their valves manually, walk that zone, and check each of the sprinklers to make sure that it's not leaking. Talk to us a little bit more about how to catch leaks in sprinkler spray, in spray heads and in rotors.
Typically, it's not going to be a pipe that's broken. It's going to be a riser that doesn't come up and seal itself off, either on a spray or a rotor head. And if you see water coming out of the base of that riser, you know there's a problem with that head. And typically, you need to change that head out and put a head that's not going to leak.
Everyone in Utah, excluding Utah County, has access to a water audit that's free given by the Utah State Extension Service. Utah County does not have that service, but you can go to the Extension Service office. They'll give you the cups and an instruction sheet so you can do your own water audit.
So yes, because you can put those little cups in, and you don't have to go to the extension agency. You can just get paper cups and put them in your lawn and just see if you're getting the same amount of water in each one of those heads. If you're getting a lot by this head and very little by this head, you know there's something wrong. Either the heads are too far apart or there's a problem with that one head and you need to make an adjustment.
Thank you. So when you're watering, how do you know how long to leave a specific zone on? Should it be 5, 10, 15 minutes?
It depends on what you're watering, what kind of grass you're watering, and what your soil's like. If you've got a very sandy loam and you're dumping 10 minutes of water on that, it's going to run right past those roots if it's a spray system and waste a lot of water. Typically in sandy loam, we leave the system on for maybe 5 minutes. If it's a rotor head, then it's going to be maybe 4 times that in sandy soil, and we water a little more often.
A lot of people here in Utah have clay soil, so how would they water with that clay?
Clay's going to retain the water a lot better than the sandy soil. So typically on a spray, you may only go 2.5 or 3 minutes on a spray several times a week.
Why is it that some people feel like they have to leave their sprinklers on for a really long time?
I think it's come from our grandfathers and great-grandfathers, because we have irrigation rights, or they had irrigation rights, and that turn or that right would generally last 2 hours or 3 hours, so they would just dump 2 or 3 hours of water by flood irrigating their lawns or their fields. And we've grown up thinking that's better, thinking you get all that water in, it's just better. But what happens is water comes and gravity works and the water just goes down past those roots, goes into the aquifer and is wasted.
So our grandfathers were flooding their fields because they had that water for just a specific amount of time. But technology's come a long way since then. We have upgraded systems, so many over the years that really we've got it down to a science. So what is the right time, or what is the right amount of time to water? Is it 2.5 minutes? Is it 5 minutes?
Well, it depends on what you're growing and what your soil's like, as we talked about. But probably the better question is how often for 2.5 minutes or for 5 minutes. And that's going to depend again on what your soil's like. But it's far better to water 4 times a week for 2.5 minutes than once a week for 10 minutes. Your lawn's not going to look very good because you're going to overwater and it's just going to be past those roots. So it just depends on your grass and your soil.
So it's better to water for a shorter amount of time, knowing that that water is going to soak down in, and then a couple days later it's going to soak down again, instead of dumping a whole bunch at once, and
Much
then it
better.
just falls through the soil profile and is gone.
Much better.
Is there something that we can do in the way that we take care of our lawn, like how high we mow the grass? Does that have an effect on how much water we use and how much water the lawn needs?
Mow the grass at 2.5, 3 inches high. A lot of people will say, no way, it won't look good, it won't look nice and smooth, and I'll have to mow more often. You mow the same, whether you mow 2.5 inches once a week or 1.5 inches once a week. Just keep it at 2.5 or 3 inches. And the reason why is those blades of grass will shade the ground, and you won't have as much evaporation. Plus, really important, you won't have as many weeds or fungus or other problems with that lawn if you keep the height at 2.5 to 3 inches.
Great. Okay. So Perry, tell us, what will the future look like? What can we do now to continue to conserve water in the future?
I don't know what Mother Nature is going to do in the future, but we need to, whether we have wet years or dry years, we need to start conserving water. If for no other reason, to save the water bill that we have to pay month after month, but more importantly is so we can help the whole neighborhood, the whole state, the whole nation by conserving the precious water we have.
Taking care of the resources that we have so that we have them in the future. So Perry, we've talked about a lot of things today, and a lot of things that will really help us as we move into the future. If you had to wrap this up with a really nice little bow, what are the very most important things that people can do today to begin to conserve water?
4 things. Understand what seasonal adjust means on your controller and use it. 2, make sure your heads are set the right spacing, head to head typically. And 3, that they're adjusted properly so they're watering evenly underneath. And 4, evaluating whether that dry spot is a water issue or a soil issue.
Perry, thank you so much for all the information that you've given us and all of your expertise. This is some great information. It will help us as we conserve our precious water.